Hey everybody, this is Steven with Improbable Wargaming. We got Kyle here. He's coming to talk about list building 101. He's our, you could say, local expert for sure. And we're gonna hear what he's got to say, and we'll go from there. So tell us about what your list building 101 ideas.
Yeah, and so I'm coming at this with a couple ideas, Steven, which is I'm assuming that for you folks watching at home that you are approaching list building with a couple things already in mind. Most people have an army they love, right? Maybe you are like, I am not happy unless I'm shredding somebody with knives and axes and battle wagons, and I gotta be running you over.
Yep.
I'm looking at you, Steven.
Hey,
I'm not happy unless I'm doing those things and I'm yelling WOG and I'm handing people the WOG card, right? Maybe that's your thing. Or maybe you are someone who says, I like to arrive from deep strike and I want my Space Marines coming off drop pods and I want my Land Raiders shooting at you and I want to see the noble forces of the Imperium crushing chaos skulls. Cool. Absolutely. Or maybe you're approaching it in the sense that you have a particular play style you like. For me, one of the things that a lot of people remember from a couple seasons back or mention to me all the time is that I was the last holdout on the Imperium list, the soup list, the Grey Knights and Astra Militarum, and I got addicted to the absurdity of it, right? and so I love playing that list, but I've changed up and play Astra a lot now. That seems to be my main thing. Whether you are chasing the meta hard or you have a favorite army that you want to play, we are going to give you some practical tips for figuring out what a list is going to look like, right? So I guess one of the questions that you and I have chatted about a little bit.
Yep.
Where is it, Steven, that you like to start when you start thinking about building a list?
So usually with my mentality with starting a list is kind of looking at how this army can fit with my play style.
Yep.
And then from there, trying to achieve that. So a lot of times for people who know me, I love going fast. You'll see with my test list typically have many units that move across the board very quickly, supported by like a second and third wave.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a lot of times how I start the mentality of how I want to approach the game. And then I kind of go from there like into like unit selection, like what does what and how they can achieve my goals. And I kind of build from there.
And one of the things that you said that I think is really insightful is that we want goals.
Yep.
So one of the things you want to articulate for yourself before you start building the list is say, okay, I think I want this list to hit really hard, right? Or I want to play Necrons, and I'm going to get the most guys on this objective, and I'm going to lock up this triangle, and now you just can't score primary, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that I do first, and I think that we both are on the same page, is it really starts with the units. I wouldn't start with an army as a whole. I would start with the individual units. And there's a few things that I'm looking for in a unit, and we can talk about what you're kind of looking for too.
Yeah.
One is, a lot of times when you look at the points decide so much, right? Because you look at you might look at a unit and say, oh, I don't know if that's very strong. Because you're like, well, it doesn't have many guns, or it doesn't do this or that or the other.
Yep.
But you also might look at the points and go, yeah, but it also costs 1/3 of what it probably should, right?
Yeah.
Like on paper, an orc truck doesn't look very good.
But 50 points makes it a whole other story.
Better.
Whole lot of story.
Whole lot of story. Or if you look at something like a small knight for chaos. If you look at what's the name of the very shooty one?
The very shooty one is going to be the Brigand.
The Brigand. The Brigand on paper looks okay. It's got a couple really good guns, and then you go to the price point, you go to the toughness, you go to everything that comes in that package, and all of a sudden you're like, I could run 10 Brigands and be happy, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I think one of the things that we want to do is when you're looking at unit selection, you're looking with points in mind. You're also looking and saying, okay, so these are the, so this is a unit that I'm going to spam. I'm going to run a bunch of,
Yep.
right? And then you're saying, okay, what's a unit that's going to support that really well, right? And what are my objectives with that? So I'm going to give you a tangible example from my sort of list building, right? I'm still in the process of rebuilding Astra after having played that out at, having played it just out at Iowa, right? And so when I'm building my list, part of what I'm thinking about is Astra Militarum has a definite need for certain units, okay? When you're building Astra Militarum, Lord Solar is going to be in there. Yep. I don't think you can build a list that doesn't have him in it right now. And why? Well, he is the ultimate support vehicle. You get your army needs orders.
Yep.
He gives orders. And he is going to need some extra friends, right? So he's going to need probably someone else to issue some orders. He's probably also going to need other people to play further up the board, right? Because Leo's a great unit for blank. And that's one of the things you want to say to yourself is not just, this is a great unit.
Yep.
This is a great unit for blank.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so Leo's great in the backfield. Artillery is great in the backfield. And one of the mistakes that people make with Astra is they say, well, let's see how much artillery I can stack up back here. Cool. So then what you got is a giant artillery park. And then you have an unfortunate phase you have to get into.
Yep.
Where you have to draw your secondaries.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you have to play the game.
And then you're like, how do I cheat? I can probably kill my opponent, but am I getting points?
Am I having to move manticores onto objectives, right?
Yep.
And so you have to have some really tough stuff that goes out and gets points. So if we were going to carve out maybe 5 basic roles in 40K.
Yep.
The Australians have 3 classifications for their characters that we can kind of apply here, called buffer, beater, fridge. Right. this is Adam. I've forgotten his last name. This was his classification, right? But that works fairly well, which is generally okay. So you want things that are on objectives, okay? Things that can go out and hold objectives and not just instantly die, right?
Yep.
You also want to have things that are in a support role, right? So Lord Solar is great for that, and he's okay on the back objective, right? You also want to have things that disrupt.
Yes.
That remove things from your opponent's objectives. And you're always going to be balancing, if you're playing an Orc army, a lot of disruption units, right? If you're playing an Astra Militarum, a lot of objective units. If you're playing Necrons, you got a lot of objective units, right?
Exactly.
If you are playing GSC, your support characters are
so good
and so dirt cheap,
and
Primus.
so many of them,
and
they do so many things.
Primus, right?
Primus is amazing. The what is it? The Nexus guy is great.
Nexus is really good.
Nexus does some great things, and the funny thing is, like with GSC, for example, the harder part with GSC is with character-wise, they have so many good choices. You really have to make sure everything synergizes. It's easy to take lots of good stuff, but nothing working together.
Absolutely.
And that's another issue you have to worry about.
So this is one of the things that we start to see in list design is the more you move into it. One of the things that so I mentioned and so we'll finish out this thought, which is we have units that get on objectives.
Yep.
We have units that support. We have units that disrupt. We also probably have another couple categories here. We probably have units that are what I would describe as flex units.
Okay.
Units that can do a couple different things.
Sure,
right?
sure.
They might go out and get an objective, or they might be in a supporting role back here, or they might be able to
Action monkey or something,
right? Like dumb trash units are good. You have to have some dumb trash units. And it's great if they can do other things, but if you accept that they're going to be flexing a lot of the time, that's pretty important, right? So objective unit, support unit, disruption unit, flex unit. And then what I would describe is you also have like units that really exist in order to, how shall I put it? That are sacrifice, right?
I had a feeling that's what it was coming.
Yeah, I was trying to put it elegantly, right?
Yeah.
You have what we would probably in a lot of games call trade units, right? where you're like, well, I know that these are going to be on the board, and armies have them built in. If you're playing sisters, if you're playing your Repentia thinking they're going to go from battle to battle, you are misguided, my friend. That is not going to happen, right? If you are playing Storm Boys, you're going to trade, right?
Yeah, they're there for trading. They're kind of a flex unit, really, because I look at them as action monkeys, steal an objective as necessary. You know, I can go into certain areas and disrupt. There's just that's what's great about them. They're affordable too.
Absolutely.
So they match. They kind of come down because they're the sacrifice. They're the flex. They're one of those units that can fit multiple roles, which to me then puts them in that Goldilocks zone.
Absolutely.
Where I'm just like, bells are going off. Like, this must be in the list.
And that's a great thing to listen for, right? Is when you hear that, you know what? I've played my game. And this is a great thing to do as you play, is to write notes to yourself and say, man, this worked so well. I loved this unit. Try running 2 of them.
Yep.
Try running 3 of them, right? Yep. That's what, and because if it worked well in one instance, it could also be, by the way, that, you know, the unit that you love, they work great at 2, but they don't work great at 3.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it depends on the matchup. But so what we're to circle back to it, the first thing we're doing is we're picking the units that we think are really important, right? And then we're testing and finding out what works. And what makes a unit strong is price. Is roles that it fills, right? But also one of the things we mentioned from the get-go is, how is your army going to win? So Stephen, what are some ways that you've seen armies win? Either you've won with them or they've won into you.
Sure. I would say more often than not, like when I'm winning, let's say, for example, with orcs, I'm denying primary. I'm really keeping them hemmed into their deployment areas for as long as possible, kind of free scoring with ease. And then eventually, you know, by the time they break out, I'm so far ahead, it doesn't matter. And then in the instances where I've lost, it's been where they've been able to just pick me up with no effort. Like they're just, my screens and my, you know, my trading units are just vanishing with no, you know, like with no real good even trades. I start just, you know, crumbling. I lose my resources, if you will.
So I would describe those as two different kinds of lists. One of which is a denial list, right? Where you have a large number of disruption units, right? And in fact, we can, with each one of these five points that we've listed, these like attributes, you can see a type of list. One, if you're running a lot of disruption units, you probably have a denial list where you are saying, you know what? I'm going to score my points super well for the first 3 turns. I'm going to make sure that you can't get anywhere, and then on 4, you're going to start to be able to get out of the backfield. But it's going to be too late, right? If you are running an army that is very objective oriented, right? If you are very durable, right? You're playing Necrons. Maybe you're playing demons, the right kind of demons, right? You know, very, very bulky demons, or you're playing big bugs or something, right?
Sure.
Then what you have is an objective list where basically what you're saying is you're basically engaged in board control, full board control, where I might not be in your backfield, but I have picked out my section of the board and I'm going to score it really well, and I'm playing Tyranids, so I'm going to be popping. I got Biovores that are popping stuff over here. They are popping stuff over here. I'm getting objectives. I'm just scoring them, and you can't really disrupt me, right? If you are, I think that the other way I would describe it is this kind of like sacrifice list, right? This is more oriented around what I would describe as the smoking ashes kind of army, which is that they are going to do so much damage to you.
Yeah, they're just a smash army.
They're a smash army.
That's the way I like to call them.
Yeah, and there are smash armies. I think that
Custodes are amazing smash army.
Smash army, right? And they're going to do some board control, right? But they're just going to smash into you, and they're going to do so much damage to you at such a huge rate. And there can be, and there's shooting armies version of this. That's it's pretty equivalent to what I do. Right. And then there's a close combat version of this, right? Not as much in the current meta, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like that's like. So if you think about the top armies right now, okay, so Eldari is primarily a board control army. They trade incredibly well, and their points are just not rational. No rational person wrote that index. You look at GSC. GSC is a denial list. They're going to smash into you. They're going to keep trading over and over, and the trade is always bad because they just come back, right?
You never get rid of them.
You never get rid of them, right? And then you look at something like Custodes. Custodes or Necrons, they're a durability army. They're gonna stay on the board. They're gonna outlast you. So what you want to decide as you're building your list is what is the way that I'm gonna win, right? And you generally want to lean into the way that your army plays. So if you're like, man, I'm playing Astra and it's all gonna be close combat. I don't think you are.
No,
unless you want the suffering of trying to play 30 Rough Riders and trying to move out of the pony corral every turn. I think that's going to be hard. So you have to say, you know what, I'm not gonna play Necrons and say I'm only gonna run no big blobs. That's not gonna work. You got to lean into what your army already does. So that is one of the things you want to think about is what is your arm? What is your strength and play style that you really want to lean into?
Exactly. Right? And for me, I tend to be more aggressive. I tend to like getting in the person's face, but at the same time setting traps, where you're like, oh, I can deal with this, and also you don't realize that because you're so focused on what's in front of you that there's a second wave coming, or that actually what I'm doing here is just a distraction. I'm actually fighting over. I really want this, and I'm trying to pull you this way, and so those kind of how you win. And so I look at armies that have mobility, and I look at unit and models that have mobility. And then, like we were saying too, like with orcs right now, like with Blast being so good, this is kind of more of a meta thing. I look at MSU getting small as I can, spreading out, because you gotta, like what we're saying, how do you win? Right now, if orcs throw all the bodies they can on the board, the blast will be so terrible you'll die really fast. And I've learned that the hard way. And my lists are now getting, like, the amounts of units are like 5 or less, just constantly shrinking. And that's like, exactly. You're looking at how to win the game, and then what your armory's weaknesses and strength are, so you can achieve it. And then, for example, like we're saying with orcs, because we can throw so many bodies, we got to go the opposite way to be a little safer.
And this is a very good point, which is not only do we react to what we see in the game, but we also react to what the meta looks like. Yeah. Right. So I mentioned, okay, well, I think if you're building an army to go to a tournament, right, one of the things you got to be realistic about is you're not going to be able to counter everything.
It's true.
So what you want to think about is you can go look and say, okay, what players are going to be there? Well, this person's going to be there, and this person's going to be there, and it's like, and if you're like, well, I see Kyle McCord's going to be there. Yeah, I'm probably bringing Astra Militarum. Yep. I'm looking at Alex Vian. Okay, he's going to bring Dark Angels. I'm looking at Ben Sherwin. I know he's going to bring Eldari, right? Sure. So then you say, oh, you don't want to build a list and be like, okay, well, I'll put a little bit of this in here, a little bit of that. But you do want to be conscious of like what's going to be out there. So if everybody's playing lots of blast weapons, it may not be the time to play all of your infantry, right? Exactly. Or you say, I'm going to play infantry, but I'm going to make sure all of them have an invulnerable save, or I'm going to make sure that they have some defensive tech that I can use. So, for example, in my Astra Militarum list, I'm one of the few people who's playing a 20-man Krieg blob.
Oh, yes.
And so you might say, well, Kyle, why are you that stupid? And there's lots of reasons, but here are the real rational reasons. So what really sold them on to me was, one, D3 guys come back a turn.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yep, which is good. Coming back in the current meta is a very strong ability, right? Two, if you kill one of them, they get +1 to hit. If there's only half of them left or fewer, you get +1 to wound.
Oh, nice.
Right, and so then if you kill all of them for 2 CP, they come back. Yep. Right, and so I don't have to worry, oh man, this is a really suboptimal lean. And the other thing that I attach to them is I attach a Primaris Psyker, who every turn says, I'm going to roll a dice on a 2-up. I get to have a 4-up invuln, right?
Oh, nice.
Why don't I run 2 of those?
Redundant.
Redundant. And when you roll 1 dice over the course of the game,
Yeah.
you will probably once mathematically fail it.
Yes.
If you roll 2 of them, you'll have them twice.
Yeah.
And I don't. And one of the things you want to consider for yourself is how much randomness do you want in your list? Right.
That's true. That's something I always try to think about. Like when I'm trying to build a list, like the randomness is what can beat you in a lot of games.
It can.
And if you can remove some of that potential randomness out of the potential list, you're looking a lot better. Like you want a list that can produce repeatable results, right?
Yep.
And if you're bringing things that does something on D3 or something, you're starting to get unreliable.
Yep.
And if you're always hoping you're going to be doing the average or you're hoping you do the max, you're probably rolling all ones. At least one game.
Game.
And then it's going to cost you the game, and you're like, what the heck? So I try to bring, like you're saying, like units that don't have like too much unreliability built into them. I'm looking at units that, the best way, when I look at a unit, the first thing I typically do is, like we were saying before, I go through the book. I go through my cards, and I'm looking for standouts, and I'm thinking about my army rules as I go. Yep. Right, so this is what my army rules are. This is what my army is telling me it wants to do, and then GW doesn't make every model do that. So you have to kind of go through, and GW does create ones that fit that mold. So then you're like, okay, this model reacts really well with like fight on death, let's say, or whatever. And so you start finding those things out, and then you start looking at points, and then I'm starting to like hem that list in and going, okay, this vehicle is amazing, but it's 300 points. This vehicle is actually pretty close to this one, but it's 150. Well, guess what? We're taking this one, and then you keep kind of doing that until all of a sudden this list forms, and then eventually you'll be at a point, like I know Kyle runs into all the time, where there's like 50 to 100 points, and you're like, now how do I cram this square peg in here? And so then that's where that final fine tuning comes. Am I taking special abilities, a relic or whatever, or am I just deciding to drop a unit, like maybe I brought 3 of, and because I dropped this, I can add 2 cheaper units in to be action monkeys or whatever. Because like, for example, in Orc list right now, Grots, they get you CP, they're 45 points, they're a throwaway unit in a lot of ways, but they're an action monkey. So I love to have one on my backfield objective. I like to have another one in a truck that I launch up and dump off somewhere where people just forget about them because they're generally a non-threat, right?
Yep.
And then so I kind of have those combos built in of how am I going to get free CP with this unit while managing, because as an Orc player, I don't care a lot about my home objective outside of I just want to make sure you don't take it easily, and then everything else is going that way, right? And so then you have to kind of look at it, like we were saying, is I like to take fast units for the first wave, right? So I'm looking at Storm Boys taking objectives, kind of stretched out. Probably an infiltrating unit to grab something that is going to solidify my a triangle that I'm trying to control. And then I'm going to take other units that are medium to fast speed that are going to be then following up, right? So first wave goes in. We hope they survive both my turn and yours to give you delayed long enough for the next wave to crash into you. And then, kind of escalating that. So then that's kind of where those things come in. So first thing once I kind of get that general list together, then I start looking at HQ. For me, often HQ comes later because I'm looking at the troops to do it, and then I'm like, okay, now what characters do I have that'll support this?
Yep.
And so then, like, for example, with Orcs, I've learned with several lists I've played, Chaos Marine stuff, that I want to have a 1-2 punch. A 1 punch typically is literally what it sounds like. You hit once, if it bounces off, oh no. So I like to have a 1-2 punch. So for example, I'll bring a block of 10 knobs. They're in a truck, and they've got a war boss with them. The war boss makes them -1 to be wounded at all times. War boss, makes them hit on 2s. Just really makes them a lot harder hitting. And then following that up, I then have a unit of 6 Squighog boys that are the second punch, right? Or they might even be the first punch because they're faster, right? So they're going to get in, hit a unit I want to kill, and then the knobs come in if I need to finish them off or strike somewhere else.
Yep.
And then the rest of and then I have 2 small Squighog boys just to be annoying, screening, and harassing things. So, these are kind of my thought process when I'm building that list.
And I think that's great because what it demonstrates, one of the things it demonstrates too, is that you can definitely have different ways of playing with points. Like, for example, I a lot of times will start with, I'm like, okay, I know with my HQs, I'm gonna have this and this and this.
Yep.
And then I'm gonna think, and then what my big question is like, there's so many tanks. Which tank do I want? Right.
Yes.
And the answer is, I want all of them, right? And like, and so I want to talk about two really key things. I think you said one of which I think is very important, which is consistency. And I think we can actually do a little. I'm going to give a little case study here. 4 of them, right? 4 of them. So this tells you a lot about like the meta and how you would build. So like a lot of people look at something like Eldari and they go, oh man, every list you could build with it is necessarily good. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately that at the moment is largely true. But other lists, like for example, with like Gene Stealer Cult, you can build a bad Gene Stealer Cult list.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about what it is. When we say consistent, it doesn't mean I have to play Custodes because everything hits on 2s and it rerolls all the way with hits and wounds.
Yep.
Because there are other ways of getting that kind of consistency. Eldari is problematic in 10th. I think we can use that phrase. Right?
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty modest way of putting it, to be honest. But because it is so consistent. Oh, I reroll a hit. Oh, I reroll a wound. Oh, if I don't like that dice, I'll just make more. Right?
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. GSC is very good because even though it has terrible ballistic skill, and they are only okay in close combat. Mm-hmm. Now they're consistent because they have so many units to cover their bases. So this is one of the things. That's one of the examples that Orcs does. Right? Orcs gets 1 million units. They all have really terrible guns. Right? But they by weight of dice they tend to win. Okay. Conversely, Votann.
Oh boy. Poor guys.
Poor guys. Yeah. Now you can make a good Votann list. You can. You probably won't go better than maybe 3 and 3, but it starts with probably 30 Hearthguard. Why does it start with 30 Hearthguard? Well, they're one of the only units that's very durable in that, so you can predict what's going to happen with them. Yep. And they got to keep a 3 of ballistic skill.
That's good.
And that's one of the problems is you'd have to say, okay, well, in order to play this army, I'm going to have to lean into something that they're giving it very sparingly, and then I'm going to have to find other good units for it to work. Like Jacob. Jacob Cummins, our friend, is playing Death Guard.
Yes.
And so when we built the list, we were like, okay, well, we probably have to start with 3 supporting units from Knights. Yep. We know Mortarians in the list. We know that there are going to be some demons in the list because, unfortunately, Death Guard got shafted in a lot of ways as an army. So we need to build in some extra kind of supports in order to play around what's there.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is you can get consistency by saying, you know what? I have other allies that I can bring in, or I'm going to lean into the strongest unit. Okay? Yeah. There's other kinds of consistency, too. I mentioned another example, which is you can play something like Custodes. Well, what makes Custodes very consistent? Well, they have 2 ballistic skills. Yep. They have rerolls. They have a lot of rerolls.
They do.
They reroll if you're playing Warrior or if you're playing the regular bricks, they're hitting on 2s. They're rerolling 1s. If you're sitting on objectives, they're rerolling all wounds. If you're playing Terminators, they're rerolling all wounds against characters, monsters, vehicles. Turns out that makes up a lot. If you have a character in a unit, they're getting at you. So unless you're like, I brought 5 Gene Stealers. Well, they're probably killing them anyway. But if you didn't put a character with them, you're not getting rerolls. Yep. So that's another way is you can just have a stat line that's very consistent and you can get a very expected experience as long as your stuff is undercosted. Because on the other end of it, I think about a unit, an army, sort of like big, like Tau, right?
Okay, yeah.
So Tau's struggling right now.
Yeah.
Stephen, why are Tau struggling?
Well, they're a shooting army with their weapons were basically not kept up with everyone else. So where a lot of armies, from what I've seen, a lot of armies jump to strength 12 weapons, strength 10. Theirs is all like 9 and less. That hurts them.
Plasma didn't go anywhere.
So they've got hampered really hard in there. They've got units that can answer the call, but they're extremely pricey. So then the problem is where they can be effective, they're too expensive. And so they've got literally like 2 units, I would say, the Storm Surge and their
Crisis Suits.
Well, the Crisis Suits are good at killing, I would say, chaff, somewhat elites and things smaller.
About killing vehicles?
But if I'm talking about like killing vehicles and stuff, they're looking at their broadsides and they're looking at their storm surge.
And they're both very expensive.
Very expensive. So putting two 3-man broadsides in an army is like 700-800 points. It's losing those is just gonna be devastating, and it makes your gameplay really inflexible because then now you're stuck in a certain role with them, and you're so worried about losing them, you may hide them more than you should, and then that also allows your opponent to really get in on you, and it can be a problem. Which Tau never want people in close.
Absolutely, and so that raises a problem, which is that you can have an army where you have a role that you need to fill, and you know it's going to be tough.
Yep.
And so you have to lean into that, and that's going to shape your list as well. So what I'm saying is, with these 4 examples, these 4 kind of case studies, the first is you can get consistency by having sheer quantity of dice.
Yep.
You can get consistency by leaning into your strongest units.
Yep.
You can get consistency by having just very strong stat lines across the board, even if like I'll admit, Custodes are not great at dealing with vehicles.
Yep.
But you get enough attacks, you can kill a lot of stuff.
Yep.
Right. Or you can say, I have this one role I know I fill really well.
Yep.
Right. And I'm going to, and then maybe there's one I'm more of a struggle. I'm going to lean towards that, or I'm going to deal with that, right?
Yep.
Try and get that kind of consistency where even if I draw knights, maybe I only win 40% of the time, but I have a chance,
Yep.
right? So then, the other thing I want to mention here is that, Stephen, you know this about me, that I am obsessive about those last 100 points,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I will test lots of different things, partially because, and this tells you that there are a lot of resources out there, because I'm thinking not only, okay, we talked about unit selection, we've talked about engaging with the meta, and then the next horizon is, let's look at what other people are doing, right? And so, for example, right now at the recording of this video, we just had the WTC.
That's
right.
true. Yep.
And so one of the things that happened was geopolitically dominant superpower, Poland, smashed through victory.
Yep.
And it just so happens that on their army, I think it was the captain, is an Astra Militarum player. He was in fact the best ranked player at WTC.
Very nice.
And so I take that very seriously. Now, one of the things I have to bear in mind, though, with a grain of salt, is a team competition. So he didn't play Eldar.
Nope.
He played GSC and Custodes, and he just annihilated them.
Yeah.
Right? And he built his list with that archetype in mind.
Yep.
And then I'm looking at lists that come out. I'm looking and having conversations with other people about what they're building. So, for example, on the way here, I called our the Sixes captain, Josh, and I said, I want to talk about flamers, right?
Yeah.
You know, because I think flamers are really strong, and we bounced ideas for a secret weapon I can't talk about but I wanted to hear what other people were finding to be strong in their armies.
Yeah.
And especially, it helps me to have conversations where I'm helping other people build lists, because I'm like, okay, well, what are you focused on? What are the limitations? What can I see in your list that maybe I can use? Even if I'm helping my friend Chris build Tyranids or something like that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, Chris is having to steer around this thing, and this is the thing that he's encountering, and maybe I'm not having the same problem, but maybe I like the solution that he comes up with, right?
Yep.
So I think that conversations with other people in the meta is really important, right? I think in test games, one of the things you can say to your opponent is, what were you really scared of, right?
Yeah.
And then I think looking at other lists that exist, what else do you do, Stephen, to kind of like build on what you've got?
Yeah, I mean, I pick the brain of our team captain a lot.
I did too.
You know, and send him lists and get told off if they don't like them. I look at lists that are doing well.
Yeah.
I throw some lists out when I look at them and I can just tell they're not my play style. I'm like, that's interesting, but I just wouldn't play that well. But I take notes from it to kind of log. You know, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. So example, like I was looking at Jack Harpster list that he played Grey Knights, right?
He did.
He played Terminators. He played, 2 blocks of standard Terminators, the battle line. Then he played 1 block of the Paladins, and just looking at how he built that, right? Like the list idea in there, which really is interesting, is that, he's able to shift around the board and hit you where you don't want him to hit you.
Yep.
And as soon as you try to counter him, he shifts away. He took only Flamers, which they're strength 6, AP 1 damage. But if you come in close, he's going to hit you with Flamers, and then he's going to fade away. And so I'm looking at like that play style. That play style is like the dinner bell's ringing. I'm like, I like that player style. I can get that. So then, looking at that and understanding his list then adds to what I want to do. I might not like, let's say he brought this sniper. And I get why he brought it, because it can hold the backfield objective. It can't get artilleried. It can tag some things here and there. But if I don't like that particular one, I can switch that out maybe for one I like, or I can try him and see if it works for me. But then you take that kind of basic list and figure out how it's playing, and then you can evolve from there. So that's a lot of times what I've done even with my orcs. Like, like Josh and I are like, and I even talk to like Adrian, and like he's an orc player, and I'll be like, here's my list, and he'll be like, I like all this, but why do you have this, right? So sharing it with another person so that maybe you're picking something because you're like, oh, I just love that unit, but you're forgetting that it has to have a purpose. And then someone else who plays the same army is like, dude, why? And then when you have to actually answer the question, you're like, you're right.
Or alternatively, someone says, and I like all of that.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things I want to say too, is that this is one of the really cool things about list building, is that I was jokingly going to ask you, what is ITC champion Jack Harpster playing some 40% win rate Grey Knights list?
Because he's playing it because what I think they did is they found the magic sauce that people aren't seeing. Because if you think about it, Grey Knights coming out of 9th, Grey Knight's success was going troops, like in the sense of no Terminators. It was moving fast. It was
suits.
It was suits, and it was power suit. It was the big Dread Knights. And that's not the meta now for them. And I think until people lean into 30 to plus Terminators in their list, they're probably going to struggle.
And that's one of the things that I want to get
adapting to the new meta style.
Well, adapting to the new meta style. What I was going to say is,
yes, go ahead.
I am someone who I love when someone tells me what the conventional wisdom is.
Oh yes,
because I know exactly what I'm not going to do. Right. Yep. Not that you shouldn't listen to people, but part of what I think is people get a lot of times in communities can get in a mindset where they say, oh, it can only be this way. You can't play Imperium. Imperium's dead. No, you can't do soup. Yep. Right? You can't do this. Oh, that unit's not playable.
Yeah.
Okay, well, but I want to know that for myself. Right. Yep. And so I think it's good to feed off what other people say. But I also think that you, in some way, look for the secret sauce.
Yeah.
What's the thing for you? Like when 10th came out, people were like, tanks are dead. Tanks are dead. Right? Like in terms of like Astra Militarum. Oh, okay. Lean Russes are too expensive.
Yeah.
Dorns aren't.
Yeah,
Dorns aren't. And Dorns and once I walk somebody through the details of what a Dorn does, suddenly it's not so uninteresting. Once Jack Harpster walks me through, oh, by the way, when my Terminators, when we get near you, I've charged 2 units, and now you're going to move towards me, and I'm going to go Mr. Demos, and I'm going to disappear, and then you can't interact with me. And now it's still your movement phase. So I'm going to go ahead and drop 9 inches away from you, and I'm going to be over here, and then I'm going to go do that again, right? Like all of a sudden it's like, well, that doesn't sound like a bad strategy at all, right? So that's to say that I'm in a lot of communities where I look at the list they're building because I want to see what people think is good.
Yep.
And then I want to figure out for myself, using my own intelligence, but also leaning on the wisdom of people like Josh, like you, to figure out what's strong. And that's one of the most fun parts of lists. And that's what the last bit I want to add in here is that list building should be fun.
It should be.
And it should be fun because as you try different things and you look at different stat lines and you learn your army, that's the way you really get to a deeper level without whatever faction you're playing, is getting to see it on the table against different things and what's possible, and then being in that conversation about what looks interesting, what looks good, thinking about these different things, and the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah, and kind of coming from that perspective is this video really is directed towards people who are newer at building lists, people who are just starting or new into the competitive side, because the thing is, like what he's kind of hinting to or alluding to is that stick with one army for a while.
Absolutely.
List building will get easier with time and with investment into an army, and then when you do branch out into other armies experimenting, that knowledge and experience will overflow into that and help you. But if you're leaping around armies, you're going to constantly struggle because you don't know any of your armies well. How are you going to build a list when you're constantly changing it up? So pick an army, stick with it, build that knowledge and the ability to see into your data, if you will.
Absolutely.
And pull out what you need. And the more you practice it, like any skill, the better you get, right?
Absolutely.
And then play your games, right? Everything is great. The 101 building list is great, but it all still comes down to play testing. You take that list and you hammer it, and you don't change that list after one game.
You don't.
You try to get one, get a 2 or 3 in. If there's and by the 3rd game, you're gonna have big bullseyes on units. You're like, those gotta go. They do nothing. They're a waste of points or whatever. What can I slot in for that? And then as you get those, more and more games on your shoulders, then you'll be able to, quickly identify bad units and then adjust your list. And then that play style of yours will form around that as well. Because then maybe this model or unit isn't bad, but it's bad for you. So
Absolutely.
Then you'll figure out what plays better to what you like doing. And then, like he was saying, like just because the community as a whole says this is good, it may not be good for your play style.
Absolutely.
And then you gotta figure out what works for you. There are people who have pulled off amazing victories with armies that were considered non-meta. Mr. Naden, Sean Naden, rocking orcs through 9th when orcs were blah. And he was winning events, doing really well. Why? Because he plays orcs, he knows them, and he just, boom, he can throw together a list like this and know it's competitive for his play style. So it's that kind of mentality.
Richard Siegler won won LVO with a list that no one thought could do it, right?
Yep.
I mean, AdMech was not at the top of anyone's radar. I think it was a fine army, and it could play really well in the right hands.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So keep all those things in mind. Like, just if you're having losses, stick to it. You're going to get better. The list building will grow with time, and just don't give up. And then as we wrap up this video, shoot questions and comments at afterwards or during or whatever. Just leave comments. We'll answer them as best we can.
Absolutely.
Join our Discord where we're having regular discussions. Our Patreons have separate area where they get to discuss strategy and stuff in more detail. So you're welcome to do that if you want. You don't have to. And then of course we've got hobby stuff and all that. So check out the Discord as well, and kind of able to communicate with us more directly. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Outside of that, thank you for joining us. This is myself, Steven.
And Kyle.
And we'll see you next time on Improbable Wargaming. Woo!